She was 8. All she did was draw her father in a police uniform for career day. But when her teacher saw the brown skin and blue, she tore the paper in front of the class. "No, sweetie," she said, smiling. "Try something more realistic." The room went silent, and her classmates started laughing. What happened next made the principal call the cops on her. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. In the heart of Chicago's South Side, where cracked pavement told more stories than the newspapers ever would, lived a boy with numbers in his blood. 12-year-old Caden Price didn't dress like a genius. His jeans were faded, his backpack worn, his sneakers one size too tight. But inside his mind, equations danced like music, each digit a note in a symphony no one else could hear. Caden wasn't just smart, he was a prodigy. But no one in his world said that word out loud. Not his teachers, not the system, not even his own mother. Because brilliance in black children is often mistaken for trouble. At Jefferson Middle, they called him disrupt. It started when he finished a semester's worth of math in 2 weeks. He asked too many questions, solved problems before teachers finished writing them, and refused to show his work when the answers came instantly. The staff called it attitude. The principal called it non-compliance. But at home, his mother, Shanice, called it what it was: survival instinct. You had to think faster than the system if you wanted to make it out whole. But survival didn't equal freedom. It didn't stop the detentions. It didn't stop the counselors from pushing him toward remedial classes. And it didn't stop the city from ignoring his file when Shanice applied for gifted testing twice. But Caden didn't need a label. All he needed was a chance. That chance came unexpectedly, through an old friend of Shanice's, a janitor at Cranebrook University. Mr. Lyle had worked the night shift for 22 years, mopping the same tiled halls that housed million-dollar labs and mines with 10 letters after their names. One day he mentioned to Shanice that Cranebrook's math department hosted an annual public symposium. Open lectures, live problem solving, big names in academia. No tickets, just walk in. Caden's eyes lit up. Shanice hesitated. It wasn't a place for kids, especially not black kids from their zip code. But Mr. Lyle said he'd be working that day. He'd watch him, let the boy see what he's capable of. And so, on a gray October morning, Caden Price stepped onto the marble floor of Cranebrook's Math and Theoretical Sciences building. Students streamed past him like he didn't belong. Tall, pale, fast-walking. Some glanced at him. Others looked through him. No one said a word. He slipped quietly into room 317, an amphitheater that smelled like old paper and dry markers. The whiteboard spanned an entire wall. The chairs, tiered and plush, were already half full. A deep voice echoed through a microphone. The speaker wore tweed and moved with the slow confidence of someone who knew he was the smartest man in the room. That man was Dr. Elric Hawthorne, Cranebrook's youngest tenured math professor and rising national academic star. On the board behind him, in bold black strokes, stood a problem no one in the room had ever solved. Not in 12 years. Known informally as the Jansen conjecture, it was a complex layered theory in non-linear algebraic topology. Unspeakable to most, untouchable to all. Dr. Hawthorne turned from the board and faced the room. "This equation," he said, "represents a wall we've been unable to break. We believe it may not be solvable. In fact, I'd argue it was designed to remain unsolved, like a riddle left by the universe." The crowd chuckled. "But I've heard whispers," he continued, "of minds that see patterns differently. Perhaps somewhere, someone will see what we cannot." Caden sat perfectly still in the back row, clutching his sketchbook. He had copied the equation before the professor finished speaking. Not just copied, understood it. Something about it felt familiar, like a rhythm he already knew but had never named. By the end of the lecture, Dr. Hawthorne invited the audience to try solving it, if they dared. "The board is open," he said, gesturing to the wall of symbols. No one moved. It was symbolic, of course. A challenge no one expected to be accepted. The room began to empty. Caden's heart pounded. "Don't even think about it," he whispered to himself. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. "Stay low, stay safe, be smart but not too smart." But something pushed him. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the challenge. Maybe it was the fact that no one else looked like him in that room, and none of them dared. So he stood up. Whispers started the moment he approached the board. The few students still packing up turned to look. "Whose kid is that? Is this part of the presentation? He lost or something?" But Caden didn't stop. He reached for a piece of chalk. Dr. Hawthorne frowned from the side of the stage. "Excuse me, young man. This isn't—" Then he paused. Something in Caden's eyes stopped him. It wasn't arrogance. It was certainty. "Let him try," someone murmured. The room fell into an uneasy quiet. Caden stepped onto the small wooden platform. The chalk felt cold in his hand. His palm trembled. He took a breath. Then, slowly, deliberately, he began to write. He didn't start at the top. He started where the equation bent, where most had failed. His first 2 lines looked like gibberish. Then a pattern emerged. A recursion trick hidden in plain sight. Students leaned in. Phones came out. "What is he doing? That's not even in the textbook." Dr. Hawthorne stepped forward, brow furrowed. His gaze shifted from the board to the boy to the notes in his own hand. Caden kept writing. Line after line. The symbols curved, spiraled, looped back in ways no one had ever considered. What he was doing wasn't just solving, it was reframing. And it was working. Dr. Hawthorne's jaw clenched. He moved closer, glancing at his assistant who had begun filming with a puzzled expression. This isn't possible," Hawthorne muttered under his breath. "It shouldn't be working." And then he saw it. One specific maneuver. A collapsing sequence that simplified the second-to-last set of variables. A trick only someone who understood the core flaw could invent. Because Caden wasn't solving the problem. He was dismantling it. Dr. Hawthorne froze. He'd seen that sequence once before, years ago. In a classified submission rejected by the department. A solution dismissed for being too unorthodox. It wasn't Caden's. It was August Terrell's. A black mathematician who vanished in 1967, after accusing the university of intellectual theft. His name had been buried. His legacy erased. And now, somehow, this 12-year-old was channeling his exact methodology. Dr. Hawthorne's chest tightened. If this boy finished the equation, he wouldn't just solve a problem. He'd expose a lie. Because that forgotten paper, Hawthorne had read it, and he'd used parts of it quietly, over the years to build his own reputation. And now the ghost of August Terrell was back. Holding chalk in the hands of a boy from the south side, Caden paused mid-line, unaware of the silent war raging behind him. His chalk squeaked, the tension in the room thickening. Every eye in the lecture hall locked onto him. Except one, Dr. Hawthorne's. And in that cold, calculating stare was something Caden didn't yet see. Something dangerous. Because that look didn't say brilliant. It said ruin him before he finishes that board. Caden didn't learn numbers from a textbook. He learned them from a cracked Casio calculator his uncle left behind the year he got locked up. At first he pressed the buttons to hear the clicks, but soon he was solving neighborhood dice games in his head faster than the grown men tossing them. Before his 10th birthday he could multiply 5-digit numbers faster than a phone app and break down mortgage rates like he'd been born in a bank. But when he started to speak about numbers in class, real numbers, not the sanitized worksheets handed out like busywork, he was told to be quiet. When he solved problems the teacher couldn't, the answer wasn't applause, it was a referral slip. Caden interrupts the flow of instruction. He makes others feel inadequate. He challenges authority too often. In his 5th grade file, those words were repeated more than anything else. Not gifted, not advanced, not exceptional, just challenging. Just behavioral. Just a problem. It didn't matter that he had the highest scores on district math assessments 2 years running, or that he built a game that taught his little cousins fractions using bottle caps. What mattered was that he was a black boy doing it with no permission, and the system didn't know what to do with a black boy who didn't fit their mold. At parent-teacher conferences, Shanice sat across from educators who smiled too wide and talked too slow, like English wasn't her first language. They leaned in with phrases like, "He's bright, but," and were concerned about his attitude. No one ever said brilliant. No one ever said gifted. They said he's distracting. They said he's unteachable. One counselor went so far as to suggest he be evaluated for emotional regulation issues, which Shanice understood as code for something else entirely. She declined. A month later, Caden was suspended for disrupting standardized testing conditions. His crime finishing early and asking for another booklet. By 6th grade, something shifted in him. He stopped raising his hand, stopped asking questions, stopped trying, not because he didn't know the answers, but because he finally understood the rules of the game. Smart was only allowed if you looked like you belonged. But Shanice never stopped watching. She saw the notebook pages filled with scribbles that weren't scribbles. She saw how he took apart the old toaster and rebuilt it with a timer. She saw how he stared at street signs, not to read them but to calculate angles and distance. She remembered her brother, a genius too, swallowed by the system before he ever reached ninth grade. She refused to let Caden be next. So one morning, she walked into the school unannounced, not as a parent asking for help, but as a woman demanding the truth. Principal Harrow met her with a plastic smile. "Shanice, we've spoken about this. We're doing everything we can for Caden. I want to see his full file," she said. "Of course," he said, standing but not moving. "Now." A beat of hesitation. Then another. But something in her stare broke through the performance. Harrow sighed, walked over to a locked cabinet, and pulled out a red folder with a yellow sticker, labeled Amen Only. He set it on the desk. "Some of this is confidential." Shanice opened it anyway. There, buried beneath a stack of behavioral notes and disciplinary records, was a crisp white sheet titled Cognitive Profile Screening, Preliminary Assessment. Her eyes scanned the numbers. IQ, Mathematical Reasoning, 99th percentile. Pattern Recognition, 98th percentile. Spatial Logic, Off Scale, Recommendation. Flagged for gifted testing. It was dated a year and a half ago. No one had ever told her. She looked up. Why wasn't he tested? Principal Harrow cleared his throat. "We, felt it wasn't in his best interest at the time. He was already showing signs of difficulty with structure. We thought pushing him into another program might worsen that." Shanice's face remained still, but her voice sliced through the room. "You buried his results." "No," Harrow said quickly. "It's protocol. Sometimes we delay testing." "You erased him." "Miss Price, I assure you." "Don't." She closed the file and stood. "You don't get to clip wings and call it guidance." That night she sat on the edge of Caden's bed as he stared at his ceiling, silent like always. She opened the folder in front of him. "They tried to hide this from us," she said, "but I found it." He didn't look at her. "Does it even matter?" Shanice swallowed hard. "Yes, baby, it does." He turned slowly. His eyes, usually filled with calculations, were blank. "You think they'll ever let me in? Anywhere?" Shanice hesitated. "You won't need permission. You'll build the doors yourself." But the damage had already started. The silence he had learned in class followed him home. He stopped drawing in his notebooks, stopped bringing books to the table. The fire in him flickered, and she felt helpless to stop it. Until a chance encounter changed everything. 3 weeks after the confrontation with the principal, Shanice got a call from Mr. Lyle, the janitor from Cranebrook. "There's a math symposium next weekend. Public event. You should bring your boy." She hesitated. "He's not in the mood." "You don't take him for the mood," Lyle said. "You take him for the moment." So she did. They dressed in their best, a collared shirt too big, and jeans without holes. They took the bus and walked the last 6 blocks. Caden barely spoke, head down the whole time. But the moment he stepped into that lecture hall, something shifted. His eyes locked on the board, his fingers twitched. And when he stood up in front of the crowd, when he reached for that chalk, it wasn't just about math. It was about defiance. It was about a boy who'd been told to sit down, choosing to stand up in front of the world. And somewhere, deep in the crowd, a man watched with sharp, hungry eyes. Not Dr. Hawthorne, someone else. A man from the district office, who had once recommended Caden be sent to a behavioral focus school. Now he watched the boy he nearly disappeared do something that should have been impossible. But Caden didn't know he was there. He didn't know about the second file Shanice found that night. A document even more damning than the IQ report. One marked confidential, staff use only. A file that didn't just label Caden's intelligence. It outlined instructions on how to suppress it. But the files his mother found in the principal's drawer weren't just shocking, they were illegal. When you're black and smart, they call it arrogance. When you're white and average, they call it potential. At Jefferson Middle School, that unspoken rule had been policy long before Caden Price ever walked its halls. The institution prided itself on diversity initiatives and equal opportunity banners draped across the lobby. But the reality was painted in quieter shades, in who got recommended for gifted programs, who sat closest to the teacher, who got second chances, and who got sent home. By the time Caden reached the 7th grade, the administrators had stopped pretending to misunderstand him. He'd been suspended twice, one for non-compliance during a standardized math test, the other for allegedly intimidating staff with his tone, though no teacher could quote what he had said. His mother, Shanice, knew what was really happening. So did Caden. The school didn't see a child. They saw a challenge, one they didn't want to deal with. On paper, Caden's scores were unmatched. In practice, he was isolated. Teachers stopped calling on him. Classmates whispered behind his back, told by grown-ups that he was aggressive, rude, or always trying to act smarter than everyone. They never said he was brilliant. They never said he was right. At a parent meeting in early spring, Shanice sat across from Vice Principal Reynolds and Counselor Haskins. It was the third meeting in 2 months. "Miss Price, we're very concerned about Caden's behavior," Reynolds said, tapping her pen on a stack of incident reports. "There's a pattern here." Shanice folded her hands. "A pattern of excellence?" Reynolds blinked. "Of disruption." Haskins chimed in, voice softer, laced with practiced empathy. "We understand your son is gifted, but he's not adjusting well to the structure of our environment. He's outpacing your environment," Shanice said calmly. "Well, regardless," Haskins replied, forcing a smile, "his presence is causing stress for the staff and other students. He's very intense." Shanice leaned forward. "Is that your professional term for intelligent black boys now? Intense?" Neither responded. Then Haskins shifted tone. "Maybe this school isn't the best fit for Caden. Have you considered alternative education models? Maybe something a little more tailored to his needs." There it was. The soft suggestion. The academic exile. The push-out. Not a direct expulsion, just an invitation to leave before they made it official. Shanice stared at them both. "Let me guess. You never said this to Maddie Thurman's parents when she had an emotional meltdown in the middle of science class. Or when Brent Stone flipped his desk last semester and told Miss Calder to shut up. That's different." "Because they're different," Shanice snapped. "Because you see them as children. And you see my son as a problem." Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, but Haskins kept her smile. "I think we're all on the same page about what's best for Caden." Shanae stood. "You don't get to decide what's best for him. Especially not while you're still trying to erase how good he already is." She walked out, gripping her son's file tighter than ever. But the real battle was yet to come. 2 days later, Caden sat in room 203, Mrs. Winslow's 7th period pre-algebra class. It was test day. The test was a joke. Word problems with misprinted fractions. Questions lifted from worksheets he'd done in 5th grade. He didn't touch the paper. Not out of defiance, but out of insult. He sat quietly, staring at it. Mrs. Winslow noticed. Walked over, arms folded. "You're not even gonna try?" Caden didn't look up. "It's not trying if it's already solved." She narrowed her eyes. "If you don't attempt the questions, I'll have to report this." He remained silent. "You think you're too smart for the rest of us, don't you?" He looked at her then, not with disrespect, just clarity. "I don't think it. I know it. But that doesn't mean I think I'm better." She froze. The words hit harder than a shout would have. He was calm, controlled, and right. Mrs. Winslow turned on her heel and walked straight to the office. That afternoon, Counselor Haskins summoned him again. This time, the meeting was brief. "We're placing you on temporary academic suspension," she said, her tone stiff, "until we can evaluate the impact your behavior is having on the classroom environment." Caden said nothing. He watched as she reached for the suspension form, pulled it from a drawer, and slid it across the table. "You'll take this home to your mother," she said. But in that moment she didn't notice something. She didn't notice the test still in his hand. She didn't see what he'd written at the bottom of the page. He had solved every question mentally. No scratch paper. No calculator. And instead of writing out every answer, he had listed the solutions as a linear code, back to front, in prime number order. A code only someone with a trained eye would even recognize. The test, which was meant to belittle him, had become a puzzle, one that now embarrassed the system more than it ever embarrassed him. Still, they pushed him out. But what none of them knew, not Haskins, not Winslow, not Reynolds, was that someone else had started watching. A substitute teacher in 4th period, a black woman named Miss Talia Green. She had seen it all before. Seen what happened to kids like Caden, gifted, black, misunderstood. She didn't just teach. She documented, observed, quietly built a dossier of how the school handled Caden's case. And she was sending that file to someone else. Someone in the district who owed her a favor. Because this wasn't just another suspension. This was sabotage. That same night, back at home, Shanice paced the living room, holding the form in her hand. "You didn't even write a word?" she asked. "I didn't have to," Caden replied, not defiantly, but wearily. Shani sighed. Baby, we can't keep doing this. They're trying to make you disappear. On paper. Caden looked up. Maybe they already have. The pain in his voice hit her harder than anything written on a school form ever could. She knelt down, held his face. No. You hear me? They're scared of you. That's why they're doing this. Because you're everything they didn't expect from a black boy. He didn't respond. He just stared at the window. The lights outside flickered as dusk rolled in. A silence stretched between them, heavy and loaded. And then Shani said something that surprised them both. I found something else in the principal's drawer. Caden turned. A second file, she said. Not part of your record. Not in the system. Just paper clipped together. No headers. Just notes. What kind of notes? Her voice lowered. Instructions. Red flags. Recommendations. All written by staff, telling each other not to escalate your profile, whatever that means. Saying you were too unpredictable for advanced placement. One even said it directly. This kid's numbers are impressive, but he's a management risk. Caden's hands clenched. They're profiling you, baby, she said. Not your behavior, your mind. He looked down at the test paper still folded in his pocket. Suddenly it wasn't just a joke. It was evidence of what they were trying to bury, of how far he'd come despite them. Shiny stepped closer. We're not backing down. We're going to fight this. I'll go to the board. I'll go to the news if I have to. But before she could finish, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. A photo. It was Caden caught mid-step in the lecture hall at Cranebrook, chalk in hand. The video had made its way online. The caption read, Boy genius or hoax? Who let this kid in the room? And beneath it a comment thread spiraling into something neither of them expected. And as the counselor reached for the suspension form, he never noticed Caden had already solved the test in front of him, without lifting his pencil. Caden's mind didn't just understand numbers. It breathed them. Most kids his age memorized multiplication tables like nursery rhymes. Caden saw them in color, in motion. Even before he had words for it, he'd noticed how odd numbers tilted and even numbers clicked. Prime numbers made him feel like humming. He once told his mother that the number 81 tasted like rust. She laughed, thought it was just his imagination. But it wasn't imagination. It was instinct, pattern memory, neurological wiring that couldn't be taught. And definitely couldn't be ignored. By the time he was 12, he could run mental simulations of formulas in real time, testing every variable, mapping outcomes faster than most computers. What others learned through years of theory, Caden saw as shape, balance, and pressure, but none of that prepared him for that equation. It had appeared on the board the day of the Cranebrook symposium. The chalk glared white under the lecture hall lights, stretching across a full 6 feet of slate wall like a challenge issued by God himself. Dr. Elric Hawthorne had presented it as an unsolved riddle. Not just any riddle. The riddle, the Jansen conjecture. 12 years untouched. Every major journal had taken a stab. MIT, Stanford, Oxford, all failed. Some argued the problem wasn't solvable. Others said it was a hoax. But within elite math circles, it had become legend. A conceptual death trap that unraveled reputations the deeper one tried to go. Hawthorne had written it for that reason. Though he never admitted it publicly, he had constructed the equation to be seductive and impossible, designed to test the limits of intuition. And now it sat as a crown jewel on Cranebrook's wall, daring anyone to try. No one had, not until Caden. The moment his eyes scanned it, he felt something shift, something familiar. To him, the equation didn't look like a trap. It looked like a pattern that had been broken, like a song someone had started, but couldn't finish. The logic inside it wasn't chaotic. It was scared, like someone had hidden the truth behind false steps and dead ends. He didn't know yet that the equation had a hidden author, or that solving it could cost him everything. That morning, long before he stood before the whiteboard with chalk in hand, Caden had already solved the outer ring of the problem in his sketchbook at home. Not all of it, just the part they thought was impossible. But instead of being thrilled, he hesitated. Why is no one seeing this? Why did they make it look unsolvable, when it's not? He said nothing. But when Shanace looked at his notebook and saw the partial proof, she paused. Baby, this looks like the one from Cranebrook. It is. She blinked. But they said no one could solve that. That professor, he said. It's been 12 years. Caden stared at the page. He missed something. Everyone missed something. Shanice reached for the phone. We should tell someone. Send this to— No, Caden said quickly. Not yet. Why? His voice lowered. Because they won't believe me. And if they do, they'll say I stole it. It wasn't paranoia. It was experience. By noon, they were back at the university. Not for a class. Not for an invitation. Just to observe. Sit in the back. Keep quiet. But the moment Caden saw the equation still on the board, unaltered, untouched since the symposium, he moved. He didn't ask. He just walked up the aisle steps, through the murmuring crowd of graduate students prepping for a doctoral seminar, and stood at the board with his hands shaking. Again. This time Shanice didn't stop him. She stood near the exit, eyes wide, phone silently recording. A nearby TA whispered to the others, "It's that kid from the video." Caden grabbed the chalk. Then a voice boomed behind him. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" It was Dean Albright. Thin-rimmed glasses, gray suit, the kind of voice that always sounded like it was about to issue a warning. Caden turned slightly. "I'd like to try solving it." The room stilled. A few laughed nervously. Dean Albright walked closer. "Young man, this is not a forum for stunts." Caden held the chalk tighter. "It's not a stunt. It's a doctoral classroom. You're not enrolled, but I solved part of it already. I think the outer function is a decoy." Silence. Whispers. Someone in the back muttered, "Wait, what?" Dean Albright's jaw clenched. "Who told you that?" Caden blinked. "No one. I just saw it." Now the dean's voice lowered, sharpened. This problem was authored under specific conditions. It's part of an institutional study. Tampering with it without clearance. Tampering? Shanice cut in from the back. "He's not tampering. He's solving." Albright glanced at her, recognizing the voice from the previous week. The woman who had found the files. The woman who didn't scare easily. But it wasn't her that worried him. It was the boy. Because if Caden had really spotted the function decoy, then he wasn't just gifted. He was dangerous. Not to the math, but to the institution. Because that decoy was not common knowledge. In fact, the only people who knew it had been inserted were the 3 faculty members who approved the problem in the first place, to deliberately make it unsolvable, to make it look authentic, to bait scholars into a maze with no exit. It was never supposed to be cracked, not because it was hard, but because it was rigged. And now, a child had peeled it open like foil. Dean Albright's voice faltered. "Young man, I need you to step away from the board." Caden didn't move. He looked back at the equation. Heart pounding. "I can show you what's wrong. Right here, line 7. That inversion doesn't belong. It leads nowhere. It just loops." A gasp from the side. A student stood, eyes wide. "He's right." Albright's voice rose. "This is not your place." But Caden had already started writing. Quick strokes. Clean. Confident. He restructured the loop. Removed the inversion. Rebuilt the equation with the recursive model he'd studied alone for weeks. It wasn't perfect, but it moved. It breathed. The numbers started to flow like water down a broken pipe. Albright stepped forward. "Security. No need," said another voice from the door. It was Professor Talia Green, the same woman who once taught at Jefferson. The one who watched from the shadows, the one who had sent his story to the university's equity board. "I invited him," she lied smoothly. "He's part of a sanctioned independent mentorship pilot." Albright froze. "You, what?" She stepped past him. "And if you put your hands on him or erase that board, I'll send this footage straight to the Chronicle's education desk." She turned to Caden. "Keep writing, baby." Shanice nearly dropped the phone. The students didn't move. They just watched. Because they weren't witnessing a prodigy. They were watching a fraud. A mathematical deception. Unravel in real time. Caden paused halfway down the board. Sweat dripped down his brow. His hand shook again. He looked back at the crowd. But no one laughed this time. No one spoke. He turned to Professor Green. "What happens if I finish it?" Her face changed. "That depends on how many people are ready to hear the truth." But just before he could write the final line, the fire alarm rang. Shrill. Sudden. Screaming through the walls. The entire hall flinched. And in that split second of chaos, Dean Albright reached forward and wiped the board clean. The chalk dust rose like smoke. The evidence vanished in 2 swipes. Gasps echoed. Caden stood frozen, white dust clinging to his fingers. And from the hallway, Security guards arrived. "Evacuate immediately," one barked. "Everyone out." Drill protocol. But Caden knew better. That wasn't a drill. That was a silencing. So why did the dean panic the moment Caden asked for a marker? At Cranebrook University, the air smelled like old money and freshly printed degrees. Hallways were lined with oil portraits of past deans, each one paler than the last. Mahogany panels, floor-to-ceiling windows, and silence, the kind that told you how expensive it was just to sit in the room. That's what made Caden's presence feel like an error code in a flawless system. A black boy from Southside Elementary, with no ID badge, no guest credentials, and no Ivy League pipeline, walking into the nerve center of elite mathematics, like he belonged. Because technically, he didn't. There was no seat with his name on it. No advisor expecting him. No professor who'd written him a recommendation letter. The symposium wasn't made for him. The problem on the board wasn't meant for his eyes. The very building had been designed without kids like him in mind. And yet he stood at the front of the room anyway. The fire alarm still echoed in his ears from the day before, the memory of chalk dust swirling into the air, like vanishing truth. Dean Albright had erased his work in front of a full room, in front of his mother, in front of students, in front of a camera, though they didn't know that part yet. Now Caden was back, not as a guest, not as a protester, as a variable. He stood in the same amphitheater. Only this time, he wasn't alone. Professor Green had used her tenured leverage to sponsor a student demonstration during the department's open lecture hour. It wasn't official, but it was sanctioned. Barely. Still, the seats were full. Word had spread like wildfire since the incident. Students who'd never attended symposiums now sat with phones out, whispering. Half the math faculty sat stiffly in the back row. A few were clearly there to observe, others to contain. The problem? The Jansen conjecture had been rewritten on the board by Professor Green that morning. From memory, Caden's partial solution wasn't up there, but the equation glared out like a ghost that refused to die. Caden stood beside it now. Hoodie zipped to the neck. Hands in his pockets. He said nothing for a long time. Some shifted uncomfortably. A few smirked. A visiting professor from MIT leaned toward her colleague and whispered, "This feels performative. What are we supposed to watch? A middle schooler brainstorm." Professor Green stepped forward. "I'd like to remind the audience that this demonstration is not about performance. It's about observation. You're not here to judge. You're here to learn." She turned to Caden. "Ready when you are." He didn't nod, didn't move, just stared at the equation like he was reading a threat hidden in the ink. Then finally he spoke. "This equation wasn't made to be solved," he said, voice quiet. "It was made to mislead. And you can't solve a lie by trusting it." Murmurs rose across the room. He reached for the chalk. No one stopped him this time. And once again his fingers moved like music. He didn't start from the top. He started in the middle, where the recursive structure hid its deception. He carved new symbols, broke rules of form, dared the equation to fight back. But this time, he did something different. He turned to the crowd, after each segment, explained it. "This variable doesn't connect. It loops here, not because the logic fails, but because it assumes the wrong premise. Here the inversion mimics function but actually creates blockage, like a false trail. This expression is derivative. You think it matters, but it just repeats what came before." Students leaned in, notes stopped, phones zoomed. He wasn't just solving, he was teaching. Professor Green's eyes brimmed with something rare in that room. But in the back row, Dean Albright sat motionless, jaw tight. Next to him, Dr. Elric Hawthorne barely blinked. He hadn't said a word since entering the room. Until now. He whispered under his breath, "He's exposing it." Albright turned. "He doesn't know what he's doing." "Oh," Hawthorne said slowly. "I think he does." Shani stood near the door, heart pounding. She'd seen her son light up before, but never like this. Not with this much weight pressing down on him. She clutched the same sketchbook he used to carry in second grade. In it she'd found his notes from weeks before. Pages of scribbles that now mirrored the symbols on the university whiteboard. He'd been ready long before anyone saw him. She caught movement in the back corner. A woman, early 30s, black suit, phone pressed to her chest. Not a professor, not a parent. She was watching too closely, recording not just video but reactions, smiling at the tension. Media, Shanice thought. Or worse, legal. Then something even stranger happened. A student in the third row, Asian American, early 20s, craned his neck and raised a hand. Wait, that sequence you just did, that's not published anywhere. Where did you learn it? Caden paused. It's not from a book. Then how do you know it works? I tested it. Against what? Caden pointed at the equation. Against itself. That's the only thing honest here. Laughter rippled. But it wasn't mocking. It was stunned. Someone stood up. Another. Then a full row leaned forward. Dr. Hawthorne's hand curled into a fist. Because what Caden was doing wasn't just innovative. It was familiar. Too familiar. A style Hawthorne had seen before. In a paper buried deep in university archives. One that had been denied publication because its author lacked formal credentials. August Terrell, the black mathematician who disappeared decades ago, who had submitted a version of this same solution long before it became Cranebrook's unsolvable challenge. Now, a 12-year-old boy was reviving it without knowing the source. Or maybe, because he knew. Caden paused again. The mistake isn't in the math, he said. It's in who's allowed to solve it. A silence spread so deep it felt like someone had shut off the air vents. Then click. A phone camera shuddered. Someone had just hit record. From the left aisle, a girl stood with her phone raised high. She wasn't faculty. She wasn't press. Just a student. And her camera caught it all. Caden. The board. The crowd. The tension. The video wouldn't be uploaded immediately. But when it would spread faster than fire. In that clip, you could hear one voice say it clearly. Who is this kid? The answer came 5 hours later. After the session ended. After Caden walked out of the hall surrounded by silence. After Professor Green smiled and whispered, "They'll never forget what you just did." The video hit Twitter, then TikTok, then national blogs. The caption was blunt. 12-year-old solves university problem. Professors try to stop him. By morning, there were 2.4 million views. But the comments weren't all praise. Some questioned the validity. Some accused the university of staging it. Some focused not on the math, but on the boy. Where are his parents? Another fake prodigy story. That he stole the solution. But buried deep in the thread, one anonymous account posted a photo no one expected. A black and white scan of a document. Handwritten notes. Old university letterhead. And a name at the bottom. August Terrell. With one sentence typed beneath. They tried to bury the proof the first time. Looks like it refused to stay dead. But the camera someone just started recording would turn Caden's name into a national scandal within 24 hours. It started as a clip. 17 seconds long. Grainy. Shaky. Taken from the left aisle of room 317 at Cranebrook University. A boy, small, hoodie zipped, hand clutching chalk, stood at a massive whiteboard, filled with symbols no one could pronounce. He turned, explained something in a calm, clinical voice. The camera panned over stunned faces, then no name, no context, just a caption. 12-year-old just corrected a university-level math problem live. In the first 3 hours, it got 20. By midnight it was trending in 3 states. By morning, it was national. It hit Twitter first, math nerds and niche academics reposting it with cautious curiosity. Then Reddit picked it up under our uplifting news, titled, "Is this the next Einstein?" But something about the boy's skin color made the algorithm hesitate. The post didn't stay in uplifting news. It was moved by moderators to general debate. Then Hoax Watch. Then YouTube got hold of it. On a channel known for viral reaction videos, a white man with thick glasses and a condescending laugh paused the clip every few seconds. Okay, but what is he actually saying here? Who even let this kid in? Bet his mom's a professor or something. Looks coached. That version got 1.2 million views in 24 hours. And from there the comments darkened.
This is fake, no way. That's real math.
Another manufactured genius to make us feel guilty. He's clearly being fed answered. Where's the real solution? He's probably autistic or something. Don't romanticize this. Then came the TikTok wave. Users stitched the clip, rolling their eyes. Y'all believe anything. Others mimicked his voice, mocking his tone. One user posted a skit. 12-year-old black kid pretends to solve equation, gets applause for no reason. It went viral too.
What no one paused to ask was his name.
No one interviewed him. No one contacted the school. No one reached out to Professor Green, who had supervised the entire session. The narrative wasn't curious. It was hungry. Because this wasn't about math anymore. It was about belief. Belief in who gets to be brilliant and who doesn't. At home, Caden sat quietly, staring at a cracked phone screen. His name was finally trending, but not because of his solution, because people thought he was lying. Shani scrolled through the comment section, her hands shaking. It's poison. That's all this is. Poison. Caden didn't flinch. He didn't cry. But something in his face shut down.
You okay?
She asked. I didn't even say anything in that clip, he replied. I know. They're making fun of how I breathe. She looked up sharply. What? He pointed. That video. The audio's messed up. Makes it sound like I breathe loud. That's what the comment's about. Her heart cracked in silence. This wasn't just racism. It was erasure, repackaged as ridicule. And the worst part? It was working. Some universities released bland statements. We support free inquiry. Others denied knowledge. Cranebrook posted a single tweet. The footage was not captured by the institution. We are reviewing protocols. But it was one voice, one face, that turned the storm into a fire. Dr. Elric Hawthorne, appearing live on national television. A Sunday morning interview on a mainstream network. The headline, Professor responds to viral math clip. He sat in a studio chair, posture perfect, hands folded. I think what we saw was inspiring. He began. The host smiled. An unexpected, right? A child solving an open problem? Well, Hawthorne said with a soft chuckle. I wouldn't call it solved. It was more of a reinterpretation. Still impressive for a 12-year-old. Certainly. Though I'd caution viewers to remember that performance doesn't always equal comprehension. The host blinked. So, are you saying he didn't understand what he was doing? I'm saying that replicating symbols doesn't mean you understand their meaning. Hawthorne replied. A parrot can mimic language. That doesn't make it fluent. The host laughed uncomfortably. Hawthorne continued. We also have to consider who's guiding this child. From what I understand, he has no formal training. That raises questions. About what? Well, authenticity. About how much of this is truly his. And with that the narrative broke. It no longer mattered that Caden had demonstrated logical comprehension. That he had solved partial segments live. That students had confirmed the math was sound. What mattered was that a respected professor had said it might be mimicry. Suddenly he became the authority. Caden became the mystery. And Black Genius became spectacle. Back at Cranebrook, Professor Green watched the interview on a laptop in her office. Fury tightening her chest, she stood up, marched into the dean's suite, and slammed the door open. Did you approve that interview? Dean Albright looked up calmly. He doesn't need my approval. He undermined a student on national television. He clarified expectations. He lied, she snapped. That boy wasn't mimicking. He understood every damn symbol. Albright raised an eyebrow. Then he'll be fine. Let the public decide. Green stepped closer. You mean let the public tear him apart until there's nothing left? No one asked him to walk into that room, Albright said coldly. And no one asked your institution to erase his work. Albright didn't respond. Because the truth was, they had erased it. They had cleared the board, suppressed the video, ordered Green not to release her own footage. But they hadn't counted on the 17-second clip from the student. They hadn't counted on the anonymous scan of August Terrell's notes surfacing. And they hadn't counted on the emails. Because someone had just started leaking internal communications thread by thread. Emails between faculty. Subject lines like, contain the narrative, reinstate protocol re-unsanctioned minors. The Terrell situation cannot resurface. The media hadn't seen them yet, but they would. At home, Caden sat at the kitchen table. Not drawing, not writing, just staring at the wall. His mother placed a plate in front of him, his favorite grilled cheese with pepper jam. He didn't touch it. They think I faked it, he whispered. They're scared, Shanae said. No, they're sure. Sure I couldn't have done it. She sat beside him. When people see something they don't understand, they either learn from it or destroy it. Caden looked at her, voice low. Then I should have stayed quiet. Shani shook her head. No, that's what they want. You walk away now, they write your story for you. But they're already writing it. She paused. Then we changed the ending. Her phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. Just 2 lines. You don't know me, but I knew August Terrell. And your boy just proved what they buried in. Attached was a file. A scan of a faded letter. Cranebrook University letterhead. Addressed to August. Dated 3 months before his disappearance. In it a chilling sentence. Your work undermines the credibility of this institution. If you proceed, we will ensure it never sees light. Shanice dropped the phone. This wasn't just about Caden. It never had been. It was about a system so desperate to protect its image that it had rewritten history, and now, faced with a boy who defied that history, was trying to do it again. And that meant one thing. They weren't done coming for him. But it was the professor's statement on live TV that turned the storm into a fire. Dr. Elric Hawthorne sat in his office surrounded by books he hadn't opened in years. Awards glinted from the far shelf, polished regularly but earned long ago. A framed headline from a prestigious journal read, "Hawthorne dissects the unbreakable. The man behind the Jansen conjecture." That article had defined his career, positioned him as the mind who dared to name the unsolvable. He didn't solve the Jansen conjecture. That wasn't the point. He was the one who presented it, curated it, framed it like a piece of art in a gallery that only the elite were allowed to walk through. And for 12 years, that equation had remained untouched. Because it wasn't just difficult, it was rigged. That's what made the boy so dangerous. Caden hadn't just approached it with a fresh mind. He had seen the flaw, the false loop, the trap. The same trap Hawthorne had planted years ago. He hadn't done it alone. The original structure of the Jansen was built on August Terrell's unpublished work. Ideas Hawthorne had accessed through a colleague, long after Terrell had been blacklisted and vanished from the academic world. August had discovered something beautiful, something profound. But August was a black man in 1967, and Cranebrook wasn't ready for a black mathematician to rewrite its legacy. The university had buried him, cited methodological concerns, revoked his grant, then redacted every trace of his submission from the institutional archive. Except one. A paper-clipped set of notes, mislabeled and misfiled under a graduate assistant's name. That's how Hawthorne found it. He was 27 then. Ambitious. Hungry. He didn't steal the entire proof, just the bones of it. Reframed it. Added complexity. Hid the truth under enough variables to ensure no one would ever trace it back. He wasn't evil, he told himself. He was preserving genius. And now, it was unraveling. Because Caden Price hadn't just stumbled into the equation, he had unknowingly revived the ghost of the man Hawthorne helped erase. And that terrified him. The morning after his television interview, Hawthorne returned to the university expecting to control the fallout. But the hallways were colder, quieter. Students stared without speaking. Colleagues nodded without eye contact. Attention hung in the air like static. He reached his office, found the door already cracked. Inside sat Professor Talia Green, legs crossed, phone on the desk, no smile. "I don't recall inviting you in," he said. "You didn't," she replied. "But we need to talk." He shut the door. "About what?" "The child you've decided to parade around the department like some kind of political statement?" She stood. "About August Terrell." The name landed like a punch. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. She stepped closer. "You knew his work, used parts of it in your own, hid the rest inside the Jansen, and dared the world to solve it. Except you made sure they never could. Those are serious accusations. They're facts." He moved past her, sat down behind his desk. August's work was deeply flawed. That's why it was rejected. It was buried. You know it. I know it. And now the world's starting to see it. She placed a printed screenshot on his desk. A tweet from an anonymous account, featuring a scan of August's 1967 letter and the Jansen equation side by side. The comment, one was erased, the other was celebrated. "They're the same." He stared at it, said nothing. Professor Green folded her arms. "You built your career on making unsolvable problems. Caden made the mistake of solving one." Hawthorne's voice was ice. "He embarrassed this institution." "No," she replied. "He revealed it." And then she left. By afternoon, the leak began. An email chain between Hawthorne and his colleagues surfaced online. Screenshots, metadata intact. The content? Not math. Memos about Caden. One read, "If this narrative spreads, it could devalue the rigor of our graduate program." Another, "We cannot allow a public perception that a minor from a public school has solved a framework designed for postdoctoral review." And then, most damning of all, "These kids lack the intellectual discipline to grasp what they think they're imitating. It's mimicry, not mastery." These kids. The phrase lit the internet on fire. Not students. Not children. These kids. Within hours it trended. These kids, students began reposting videos of black children in STEM programs, coding apps, building machines, solving problems. The backlash was immediate. Caden's clip was reshared with fresh momentum. But the damage to him was done. Because the world had already heard Hawthorne's voice, already seen the email, already decided. Some praised Caden. Others still doubted. But now it wasn't about whether he solved the problem. It was about what the system had done to protect its pride. Meanwhile, Caden sat in Shanice's apartment. Laptop open. Inbox full. Offers. Threats. Interview requests. Speaking invitations. And a dozen messages saying he'd ruined the integrity of academic mathematics. One even said, "You're making real scholars look stupid. Congrats." He stared at it, closed the laptop. Shanice walked in. "Another one?" He nodded. "They want to film a documentary now," she said. "3 networks. One wants you to come on a morning show." He didn't respond. "Baby, you don't have to do anything, just breathe." He finally looked up. "Why do they hate me?" She sat beside him. "Because you were never supposed to be seen." The doorbell rang. Shani stood cautiously. Opened it. There stood an older black man. Late 60s. Cane in hand. Tweed jacket. His eyes tired but bright. "I'm looking for Caden Price," he said. "Who are you?" He smiled. "My name's Terrell. August was my brother." And when the email leaked from his department, the world saw what he really thought about kids like Caden. The media didn't just change its mind. It flipped. 1 week after the video went viral, headlines that once praised Caden's genius turned cold and corporate. News anchors shifted tone. Phrases like unverified claims and academic controversy replaced words like brilliant and historic. Hosts who had invited Shanice for interviews now ghosted her number. Commentators whispered theories of fabrication. One panel even suggested Caden had been positioned by activist professors as a diversity stunt. The boy hadn't spoken publicly. But the world already decided who he was. A puppet, a symbol, a fluke. One guest on a national morning show called it the most dangerous kind of overcorrection, glorifying unvetted genius, just to balance the scales. Shanice turned off the television. "They talk like you're a threat to math itself," she muttered. Caden sat across from her at the kitchen table, scribbling symbols on loose notebook pages. He didn't answer. He hadn't said much all week. Instead he wrote, and erased, and wrote again. Because beneath all the noise, Caden had found something deeper inside the Jansen equation. A pattern inside the pattern. Nested logic that wasn't just misaligned, but misapplied. Not just unsolvable, but intentionally misleading. What if, he wondered, this wasn't just a bad equation, but a bad philosophy? What if the way math was taught was designed to filter out minds like his before they even had a chance? That's what the problem felt like now. Not a question, a filter. And if he could invert that filter, he could do more than solve it. He could reframe it. Not for the PhDs, for the kids like him. Back when he was 5, Caden had once said numbers spoke to him. Not as sound, but as shapes. At first, his mother thought he meant the kind of visual learning that got talked about in educational blogs. But it wasn't that. He saw balance, weight, movement. He described equations like they had rhythm, like they were music with steps you could walk through. He didn't learn math. He translated it. And now, with the world turning its back on him, Caden made a decision. He would stop trying to prove himself. He would build something instead. That afternoon, he opened a free code repository. He labeled the project, Unfolded, a visual framework for seeing math differently. Then he began uploading pieces. No names, no press release, no announcement, just raw, silent brilliance. Diagrams that translated complex theorems into animated sequences. Interactive models that showed the recursion patterns within the Jansen framework. A simplified version of his proof. Not for universities but for middle schoolers. It spread slowly at first, but math forums noticed. Then Reddit. Then educators on Twitter. One high school teacher from Detroit wrote, "Whoever made this just changed the way I teach math forever. My students get it now." Another comment read, "This feels like something out of the future. Is this really a kid?" Still, Caden kept his name off the project. Let the work speak. But as the downloads climbed past 30,000, the backlash also shifted. Because the university, still locked in damage control, had no idea their most embarrassing critic was now teaching more effectively than their entire department. And then the leak happened. Again, someone, anonymous, maybe inside the university, sent an internal tech memo to a local education reporter. It warned of unauthorized outbound traffic from server IP 21.456U29, which matched the terminal in room 3, the location where Caden had first started sketching the Janssen solution. The leak claimed this IP had uploaded several large datasets under an unnamed user profile. When the story hit the blogs, journalists started connecting the dots. Who was behind Unfolded? Was it him? Was it the same boy? That evening, Caden sat in his room, floor covered in paper, notebooks layered in half-finished thoughts. Shanice entered, holding her phone. "They know," she said. He looked up. "About the site." She nodded. "Somehow, they're tracing it." "Let them." She hesitated. "They'll try to shut it down. Then I'll mirror it." "Caden, this isn't just math anymore. It's politics now." He stood, walked to the window. The city lights blurred in the distance. "It's always been politics," he whispered. "They just made sure we didn't notice." He turned back to her. "I'm not hiding anymore." But neither of them saw what was coming. At 10:36 p.m., the entire Cranebrook University network went down. Students lost access to course portals. Professors couldn't upload assignments. The internal server froze. Staff emails crashed. The IT team called it a targeted overload event. But someone had been waiting for it. A mirror site identical to Unfolded went live from a different server in real time. Public. Free. Globally accessible. Within 10 minutes, it had 18,000 visitors. Within 20, it was translated into 4 languages. Within 30, someone tweeted, "This is the most beautiful way I've ever seen math explained. Who made this?" The next morning, a reporter from EdTech Journal reached out with a direct message to Shanice. "We know it's your son. We want to profile him. The world deserves to know." She showed it to Caden. He didn't answer right away. Then he picked up a marker, turned to the whiteboard in their living room, and wrote, "Show the work. Let the truth prove itself." And then somewhere far from Southside Chicago, a mathematics professor from Ghana tweeted, "This framework is more than a solution. It's a philosophy. Whoever built this, thank you for making space for minds like mine." Shanice read it 3 times. The message wasn't just spreading, it was resonating. Later that night, back at Cranebrook, Dean Albright sat with Hawthorne in the administration wing, faces pale. "You said the problem was dead," Albright said quietly. Hawthorne didn't speak. "You said no one could trace it." Still no reply. Because the worst had happened. Caden hadn't just survived the scandal. He'd rewritten the game, built something they couldn't dismiss, and it had gone viral without needing them. But the true panic didn't set in until the university received a cease and desist from the Terrell family, demanding full acknowledgement that the Janssen conjecture had originated from August Terrell's unpublished work, which had been withheld and repackaged without credit. The same work now forming the backbone of Caden's visual framework. Suddenly, it wasn't just a PR nightmare. It was legal. It was moral. It was historic. And somewhere, quietly, the boy who they called a fraud was watching it all unfold. Not with celebration, but with clarity. Because he knew the system wouldn't go down without a fight. But the proof was already live. And when the university's network crashed, the proof had already gone live. America didn't have a problem with genius. It had a problem with where that genius came from, and what color it wore. For weeks, the debate over Caden Price's abilities had been framed as a conversation about academic standards, curriculum integrity, and proper channels of advancement. But those were just synonyms for something else: control. Because if a 12-year-old black boy from Southside Chicago could walk into a university, dismantle their sacred problem, and then rebuild it into something better without credentials, without permission, without a name they recognized, what did that say about the gatekeepers? And worse, what did it say about all the other brilliant minds they never let through the gate? They couldn't accept it, so they didn't. They fought it, minimized it, questioned everything except the one variable that mattered most: the truth. And truthfully, Caden had already done the one thing no PhD in the building had dared. He removed the ego from the math. He didn't need to be applauded. He just needed to be understood. But that wasn't the game they were playing. In those ivory lecture halls and glass towers, math wasn't just logic, it was power. And when the wrong hands held it, the system scrambled to contain it. That's what Caden had become in their eyes: a threat with a backpack. They used language like due process, review panels, and scholarly skepticism. But underneath it all was a single echoing truth: he didn't look like the kind of boy they expected to be brilliant. and that made his brilliance unbearable. The attacks turned sharper. A leaked faculty memo called Caden's framework reckless pedagogy. A columnist from a conservative outlet said Unfolded was more cultural propaganda than mathematics. One professor called it dangerously accessible. Dangerously accessible. That phrase circled the internet like a curse. It was supposed to be an insult. Instead, it became a badge. High school teachers downloaded the Unfolded framework in record numbers. Students in Brazil, South Africa, South Korea, and Baltimore were all studying it within a week. It was translated into 7 languages, uploaded to open-source repositories, in case the original site got pulled. But the more it grew, the more hostile the response became. At Cranebrook, whispers spread of a formal inquiry. The provost called an emergency meeting. And then, as if orchestrated, a plagiarism accusation appeared. A tenured professor from a different university, Dr. Soren Vassal, who had once cited Hawthorne in his doctoral dissertation, publicly claimed the Unfolded framework was built suspiciously close to his own unpublished thesis. He released a vague outline. No equations, no files, just a claim. But it was enough. Caden was accused of intellectual theft. Again. Shanice sat at their kitchen table, lips trembling as she read the article. The headline read, "Viral math prodigy may have stolen work, expert claims." Her chest tightened. She had already packed away the emails from earlier attacks. She had already filed a complaint after their apartment door was vandalized with the words, "You lie. You steal." But this felt different. This was institutional.
This was chess.
"They want to bury him," she whispered. Professor Green called 20 minutes later. "They're pushing for disciplinary action," she said. "Not on him. On me." For what? For overstepping procedural boundaries and exposing minors to unapproved academic material. "They want to strip my mentorship license." Shanice closed her eyes. "What can we do?" Green hesitated, then said, "Fight back with something they can't deny." That night, Shanice returned to Cranebrook. Alone, she walked through the library stacks like a woman on a mission. Past the shelves of journals and archives, through a side door marked Faculty Archives. Only. She had a key. Green had slipped it to her the day before. Down a narrow hallway, she found the room. Restricted academic contributions. She typed in the code. Entered. Inside were dozens of steel cabinets, all labeled by decade. She pulled open the drawer marked 19. Inside she found it. A thick manila folder. Faded label. Terrell. AA. Jansen materials suppressed. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. Inside were original handwritten notes, diagrams, equations. But what stopped her cold was a stamped page at the bottom. Unpublished. Archived. Not to be cited. And beneath that, faculty review deems this work non-original, repetitive. But the equation was the same one that now bore Hawthorne's name. She flipped to the back. There, paperclipped to the last page, was a carbon-copied letter. Internal. It was from the review board. And it said, "August Terrell's framework, while mathematically sound, does not represent an innovation this institution is prepared to endorse." Additionally, his failure to adhere to formal formatting and his confrontational tone with faculty further compromise the work's credibility. "We recommend internal archiving. External submission not advised." Translation. They buried him for not playing nice. Not for bad math. Not for plagiarism. Not for error. But because he wasn't the kind of man they wanted to be right. Shani scanned the letter. Every page. Sent it to Green. Then backed up every file to an encrypted drive. Caden deserved the truth. By morning, the document had made its way into the hands of a journalist. And by that afternoon, it hit the web. Exclusive. Leaked archive confirms Cranebrook's suppressed black mathematician in 19. It was the crack the story needed. Because now this wasn't about a boy stealing math. It was about an institution stealing history. Caden read the article in silence. When he finished, he looked at his mother. "They really did it," he said. "They did it to him," she replied. "And they tried to do it to you. But they didn't." "No, baby. They didn't." He opened his laptop, logged into Unfolded, and there at the top of the page, he added a line. "Based on the buried work of August Terrell, 1934-1973. May the world finally see you." Students all over the world clicked it. Teachers paused their lessons to read it aloud. A girl in Tulsa cried as she read the dedication, whispering to her mom, "He looks like me." Caden didn't say much after that. He didn't need to. Because the math was there. The work was visible. And the world had just witnessed proof of what happens when genius is seen through skin, instead of substance. Still, the fight wasn't over. Because buried deep in the Terrell file was something Shanice hadn't noticed at first. A second envelope, unopened, addressed to the Office of Academic Ethics, internal use only. Inside was a statement. It wasn't by August. It was a confidential memo, unsigned, warning the board that one of their own had plagiarized Terrell's work and was planning to reframe it. The date? 7 months before Hawthorne introduced the Jansen conjecture, and the document his mother found in the university archive proved this wasn't the first time a black genius had been erased. Before there was Caden Price, there was August Terrell, and long before anyone wrote his name in textbooks, it had already been erased. August had been 33 years old, the year he walked into Cranebrook's mathematics department, with nothing but a briefcase full of notebooks, a steel-tipped pen, and a proof he claimed would reshape how the world understood non-linear equations. He wasn't polished. He didn't come from money. He didn't carry Ivy League prestige, or a mentor with clout. But what he had, what no one could deny, was brilliance. His mind worked like an engine, with no friction. He saw through false complexity, and exposed the heart of every problem in seconds. He solved sequences by flipping their logic inside out, often finishing in minutes what tenured faculty couldn't in months. And he was black. That was the part that mattered most, though no one said it out loud. August's genius wasn't nurtured. It was scrutinized, watched, then quietly corralled. Cranebrook University invited him to speak once, at an internal research roundtable. It was 1967. Civil rights were still being debated in courtrooms and universities across the country. But in that room they watched August like he was an intruder. He introduced his findings gently, almost nervously. A new way of deconstructing recursive equations using what he called mirror theory. A concept so ahead of its time that one professor reportedly told him, "This reads more like poetry than mathematics." August had smiled, replied, "Sometimes the truth doesn't sound like what you're used to." They didn't laugh. They never invited him back. And within 6 months, he was gone. No press release, no journal submission, no rejection letter. Nothing. The only remaining trace was a stamped file buried in a cabinet marked unverified contributions. But now, in the shadow of Caden's rise, the file had resurfaced, and it was louder than ever. Reporters dug through university records. Historians began pulling archived footage from campus security logs, hoping for a glimpse of the man who had been pushed out of academic history. A single black and white photo made its way onto message boards. Grainy, but clear. A young man, tall, dark-skinned, afro-tight, suit pressed, standing at a whiteboard, chalk in hand, symbols halfway written. It was a photo that looked strangely familiar, because side by side, it matched one taken 56 years later. Same board, same room, same posture. Caden Price and August Terrell. Only difference? August had disappeared, and no one knew where he went. Some said he moved south. Others believed he gave up mathematics altogether. One rumor claimed he'd been hospitalized after suffering a psychological break. Though no documentation existed, the university claimed he had simply declined further involvement. But that was a lie, because Shanice had found something else in the folder Green helped her access. A second envelope, yellowed by age. No stamp, no address. Inside was a single letter typed, unsigned. It read, "Mr. Terrell's presence on campus has become a liability to institutional cohesion. His recent challenges to faculty authority and disruptive academic claims have drawn unnecessary attention. It is advised we sever all formal ties and discourage future collaboration. His work, while intriguing, should remain internal. If he chooses to continue his research, he must do so outside this institution. He will not be supported. Ensure this is understood and quietly enforced." Shanice read the letter 3 times, then passed it to Professor Green, who scanned it, mouth set in a hard line. "They didn't just ignore him," she said. "They exiled him." Caden sat nearby, quiet. "What happened to him?" he asked softly. Green shook her head. "No one knows." Shanice cleared her throat. "That's not true." Both turned to her. She held up her phone. "I found something." She clicked play on an old voicemail. A message from Harold Terrell, August's younger brother, the man who had shown up on their doorstep weeks before. "Your son reminds me of August. Not just because of the math, because of the quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes when the world won't make space for your voice. After they pushed August out, he didn't stop. He kept writing, teaching at a community center on the south side. He was never the same, though. They told him his mind was too much. And eventually he started to believe it. He disappeared in 73, never found a body, just a letter. Said he was tired of being invisible. I think he knew what was coming, and he couldn't survive it. The recording stopped. Silence filled the room. Caden stared at the floor, knees pulled to his chest. They erased him, he whispered. Green nodded. And they're trying to do it again. To you. But something had shifted in Caden.
Not rage.
Not fear. Something else. Resolve. He stood up. Walked to the living room wall, where a whiteboard was mounted now, replacing what once was just paint. He uncapped a marker. Started sketching. Green watched in silence. What are you doing? Caden didn't answer immediately. Then softly, finishing what he started. Because the truth wasn't just that August had been brilliant. It was that his method, the very style he used, was the same visual philosophy Caden had rediscovered on his own. They called it mirror theory, but now the world was calling it unfolded. It wasn't coincidence, it was legacy. And legacy doesn't die quietly. The next day, the resurfaced photo of August standing at the Cranebrook board made the front page of the New York Times alongside an image of Caden doing the same. Headline: 56 years apart. Same board, same brilliance, different outcome. But for many the answer was already clear. Because buried beneath the surface of academic debate, prestige and protocol, was the simple truth no one wanted to say out loud. If August Terrell had been white, his theory would have rewritten textbooks. Instead, it was buried until a boy who looked just like him stood in the same room and unknowingly repeated history. This time, though, the world was watching. And in every school that downloaded Caden's framework, in every classroom where a student who once hated math now saw it as art, in every whispered "he looks like me" that echoed from desks in Alabama to rooftops in Brooklyn, August Terrell was no longer forgotten. But the question still remained. If Caden could reach this far with no backing, no funding and no permission, what could he do with full access? That's what someone else had been wondering. Because late that night, as Shanice tucked Caden into bed, her phone buzzed. An email. Subject line: invitation to collaborate, from the Office of the National Math Institute. Attached was a formal request for Caden Price to join a think tank of independent scholars pushing curriculum reform for underserved youth in STEM. But it wasn't the invitation that made her breath catch. It was the signature at the bottom. Dr. Miriam Estes, the same woman who had once turned down August Terrell's publication and now wanted to publish his successor. And the photo of August that resurfaced revealed something horrifying. He had stood in the same spot Caden now stood. They couldn't disprove the math, so they tried to destroy the boy. The moment Caden Price proved that the Jansen conjecture wasn't just solvable, but flawed by design, Cranebrook University's tone shifted. Publicly, they called it a landmark educational moment. Privately, they drafted crisis memos behind closed doors. The boardroom meetings no longer mentioned academic celebration. They used phrases like risk mitigation, institutional optics, narrative control. And then, the pivot. The strategy wasn't to fight Caden's solution, it was to discredit him. First came the emails. Anonymous. One accused Shanice of stage mother manipulation, implying Caden had been coached. Another claimed the unfolded framework was an elaborate scam driven by publicity-hungry radicals. They were poorly written, full of dog whistles, but effective. Then came the sudden audit of Professor Green's mentorship license, followed by whispers that Caden had access to restricted university systems, as though the boy had hacked his way into genius. The institution couldn't erase his mind, so they tried to erase his merit. Shanice wasn't surprised. She had grown up watching brilliance go punished for showing up in the wrong skin. But now it was happening to her child. It got worse. Caden received a letter from the university's Office of Ethics. Cold. Formal. It stated that due to unresolved concerns regarding the originality and authorship of intellectual material attributed to the unfolded project, the university was launching a full investigation. Caden sat on the couch when the letter arrived. He didn't cry, he just folded it once, then again and set it beside him. "Do they think I care?" he whispered. Shanice knelt down. "They think you'll crack." He looked at her, calm. Then they've never seen how glass becomes diamond. But they were still coming. The next move was more calculated. A press release leaked to a local education blog. claimed that Caden's presentation at the Cranebrook Symposium had not been formally authorized, and therefore did not reflect the standards of the university. A subtle lie, but a dangerous one. It opened the door for other headlines. Cranebrook disavows child math prodigy's presentation. University under fire for hosting unauthorized student event. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that Shanice had been recording everything from the start. Every meeting, every warning, every attempt to threaten her into silence. Because she'd lived through it before, not as a math prodigy, but as a woman in housing court, in job interviews, in grocery stores where managers assumed she didn't belong. She learned long ago, truth without proof is just noise. She had proof, and now someone was leaking it. At first it was a single audio file. A meeting between Dean Albright and 2 board members. The dean's voice unmistakable. If we don't slow this down, that boy becomes a symbol, and symbols get messy. It went viral within 24 hours. The backlash was immediate. Cranebrook issued a statement calling the recording unauthorized and potentially altered. But the voices were clear, the intent undeniable. And then the second leak dropped. A clipped audio bite of Dr. Elric Hawthorne himself, recorded just days before his TV interview. It doesn't matter what the math says. He's a child, and worse, he's the kind they only elevate when they're trying to make a point. That clip burned across the internet like gasoline on fire. The kind they elevate began trending. And with it, support for Caden surged again. But with support came more danger. One morning, they found a flyer taped to their apartment door. White paper, red letters. We see you. Go back to where you belong. Shauna stared at it for a long time before pulling it down. Inside, Caden didn't flinch. He just asked, "Where do they think that is?" She shook her head. "Anywhere we're not." Later that day, Professor Green called. "They're scrambling. Those recordings were never supposed to see daylight." Shanice kept her voice flat. "They underestimated how long I've been preparing for this." Green exhaled. "They've already suspended me." "What?" "Pending review of professional conduct and violation of internal protocols." "It's retaliation." Shanice's throat tightened. "You protected my son. And now I need to ask you to protect him back." Green hesitated, then said quietly, "There's more. I didn't tell you earlier, because I wasn't sure." "Tell me now." An internal committee was formed weeks ago. Their goal wasn't to assess his work. It was to find grounds to discredit him before it could be published formally. They called it a containment protocol. Shanice's breath caught. "This is bigger than Cranebrook, isn't it?" "I think so," Green replied. "Some of these faculty members have ties to textbook publishers, curriculum boards. If Unfolded goes mainstream, it changes the industry. So they'd rather kill it than let it grow. And they're not done yet." Caden, listening from the doorway, said softly, "Let them come." He turned and walked back to his desk, opened his notebook, picked up his pen, because that's what scared them most. Not the recordings, not the leaks, not the headlines. Him. Still writing. Still pushing forward. Still unbroken. And then just when they thought they had time to recover, a third recording leaked. This one wasn't audio. It was video. Security footage from the day of the symposium. Dean Albright erasing the whiteboard. Caden standing frozen. And in the corner, Shanice's phone visible, recording, capturing the entire equation moments before it was wiped away. The solution. Real. Permanent. Undeniable. It was uploaded anonymously to every major outlet within minutes. Labeled, "What they tried to erase." The footage exploded. Even doubters went quiet. The visual proof was there, line by line. Overlaid, scholars confirmed the integrity of the solution. Commentators issued retractions. Articles titled, "Maybe he did solve it after all," replaced the skepticism from just days earlier. And that's when the phone rang. Not Shanice's. Caden's. A blocked number. He answered, cautious. A man's voice. Old. Graveled. "You don't know me, son. But I watched them do the same thing to your predecessor. I didn't speak up then. I should have. I'm ready now." "Who are you?" "Someone who used to sit at that table. Someone with files they thought were destroyed." Caden's voice didn't shake. "Send them." The line clicked. No name. No trace. Just silence. But something was coming. And this time the system wasn't the only one with secrets. But Caden's mother had secretly recorded every meeting, and now someone was leaking them. They called it a disciplinary review. But everything about it felt like a trial. A long oak table. Leather chairs. A panel of 6 university officials. 3 of whom Caden had never met. 2 legal consultants, sitting to the side with expressionless faces, an observer from the state education board, who kept glancing at his watch. The room was quiet, sterile, and meticulously arranged, like the outcome had already been decided. And maybe it had. Caden Price wasn't supposed to be there as a guest. He was the subject. The notice had been emailed to Shanice only 3 days prior, to address formal concerns regarding academic misconduct, unauthorized system access, and violation of intellectual property protocol. Translated: "You embarrassed us. Now we'll make you disappear." Shanice had offered to bring a lawyer. Caden had said no. "Not out of pride, out of purpose. I want them to see who I am," he said, "not who they're scared I might become." He walked in that morning in a simple button-up and jeans, holding a single object, a black zippered binder. No entourage. No press. Just him. And the truth. The panel began as expected. Dean Albright spoke first, in his usual calm cadence. "This is not a punitive hearing," he said. "It is a procedural review." Lie number 1. Caden sat straight, eyes focused. No fear. No flinch. Professor Miriam Estes spoke next. She was newer to the board, invited last minute to provide balanced perspective. She'd been the one who contacted Shanice privately about August Terrell's case, yet now she wore a mask of neutrality. "Caden," she said gently, "we're here to ensure due process. We'd like to give you the chance to respond to the accusations made against you." He nodded once. "May I ask what, specifically, I'm being accused of?" Dr. Elric Hawthorne leaned forward, fingers laced. "The framework attributed to you, unfolded, bears similarities to existing mathematical structures that have not been formally cited. Furthermore, there are questions regarding how you gained access to restricted platforms within this institution." The phrasing was precise, accusation disguised as academic concern. Caden said nothing, just unzipped his binder. Inside were 3 tabs: proof of authorship, 2, correspondence and recordings, 3, August Terrell. He placed the binder flat on the table. "I'd like to walk you through each," he said calmly. "If that's permitted." A beat of hesitation. Then the board chair, a woman named Dr. Liz Carraway, who'd remained silent until now, nodded. "Proceed." Caden opened the first tab. Inside were printouts, stamp-stamped drafts of unfolded source code, diagrams, and preliminary notes from months prior. He handed each board member a copy, watching them scan the dates. "These were written before any alleged access," he said. "They were created on my home laptop, offline." Dr. Vassell, who had accused him of plagiarizing similar work, looked down awkwardly. He had no such drafts. Caden moved to tab 2. "A flash drive. Contained here," he said, "are audio recordings of meetings involving Dean Albright, Dr. Hawthorne, and other faculty, where they openly discuss ways to undermine my credibility before this hearing was scheduled." Silent. One of the legal consultants shifted. "May I?" Caden asked, holding up the flash drive. Dr. Carraway hesitated, then nodded. Caden plugged it into the provided laptop, pressed play. Albright's voice filled the room. "We need to slow the boy down. If this gets out of control, it reflects poorly on the entire department. We'll find something procedural. A tech breach. Even a formatting violation if we have to." Gasps. Professor Green sat in the corner, arms crossed, unflinching. Caden paused the audio. "There are 4 more clips. No one asked to hear them." The room had gone completely still. Caden opened tab 3. Laid out were documents, original notes from August Terrell, letters, the confidential faculty memo revealing an internal warning from 1967 that someone might steal Terrell's work, the identical equation, Jansen, mirror. He placed the final page on top. A side-by-side comparison of August's mirror theory and the structural logic of Unfolded. "This," Caden said, voice clear now, "was never about math." He looked directly at Hawthorne. "This was about control." Hawthorne didn't speak. Caden turned to Carraway. "I wasn't supposed to be here. Not because I did something wrong, but because I reminded you of someone you tried to forget." No one argued. No one moved. And then Caden reached for the last item in his binder. A folded page, tucked into the back pocket. He opened it slowly, held it in the air. "This," he said, "is a formal request signed by 6 high school principals asking to adopt the Unfolded framework in their classrooms." He handed it to Dr. Carraway. She read the names. One was from the very district that had once labeled Caden disruptive. Another was from a school that had called August Terrell's ideas Non-essential. She looked up, eyes moist, then whispered, "Where did you learn how to present like this?" Caden smiled faintly. "My mother." Behind him, Shanice sat quietly. Her eyes never left the boy she'd raised. A boy who walked into their trap with nothing but truth and turned their courtroom into a confession booth. Professor Green stood. "I have only one question," she said. "Is this university prepared to publicly acknowledge what it tried to erase twice?" Dr. Caraway didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the final page Caden had handed her. August's notes. And the moment her eyes reached the signature at the bottom, she gasped. Not softly, audibly. Everyone turned. "What is it?" asked a board member. She turned the page, stunned. "I've seen this handwriting before," she whispered. "What do you mean?" She stood up, walked to the window. Her voice, when it returned, was trembling. "Years ago, I was a student intern, transferring physical documents from the math department's archive to digital storage. I found a handwritten submission with no author, just scribbles, symbols. I remember being mesmerized by it. But the faculty told me it wasn't important, that it had been debunked." She looked at the paper again. This is it. This is the same handwriting." It was Terrell's. 56 years later, his work had not only survived, it had proven itself. And the child they tried to humiliate had become the vessel that carried it back into the light. The room was still. The hearing was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. And when he opened the final page, the board chair gasped audibly. The live stream was supposed to be small. A quiet session. One whiteboard, one boy, one chance to set the record straight. No stage, no lights, no applause, just chalk. It was Professor Green's idea. Not a press conference, not a TED Talk, just math, pure and unfiltered. If the world still doubted Caden Price's genius, they could see it for themselves. No cuts, no commentary. Green rented a small university lecture room off Cranebrook's main hall. Neutral ground, not officially sanctioned by the board, but not blocked either. A compromise. At 8:52 a.m., Caden stood before the board, hoodie sleeves pushed to the elbows. He stared at the blank slate as if speaking to it in a language no one else could hear. The live stream began with 11-12 viewers, mostly students, a few journalists, and a handful of educators, curious about the controversy. No introduction, no voiceover, just a boy and silence. Then chalk met board. At first it was ordinary, line by line, symbol by symbol. Caden built the Jansen conjecture from scratch. Not copied, not repeated, but re-derived. His hands moved with quiet precision. He didn't rush. He didn't push. By the 30-minute mark, comments began rolling in. "Wait, this kid really knows what he's doing. Yo, he's building this backwards and still getting the same outcome. That's not mimicry. That's mastery." At 9:24, Professor Talia Green posted the link to her verified Twitter account with 5 words, "Let him finish. Just watch." Within 20 minutes, the viewer count surged from hundreds to thousands. By 10:10 a.m., it was over 1 million. Caden still hadn't spoken a single word. He transitioned into explaining unfolded, not through speech but through annotation. Next to each line of math, he sketched out visual logic, like a coder annotating his own source code. He made it digestible, then beautiful. Diagrams folded and unfolded across the whiteboard. The comments exploded. "This is how math should be taught. I'm crying. My son is watching this with me. He finally gets it. This kid just humbled every institution that said he wasn't real." News stations scrambled. CNN cut into a commercial with a breaking banner. "Live, viral prodigy proves unsolved equation on stream." By 10:34 a.m., the stream hit 5.7 million viewers. Caden never looked at the camera. He didn't acknowledge the audience. Because this wasn't a performance. It was a reclamation. He drew the final closure of the equation, circling a segment of logic that had been debated for over a decade. Instead of a full stop, he laid down a mirrored curve, a symbol from August Terrell's original notes, one the academic world had never seen. It wasn't a flourish. It was restoration. Then Caden stepped back, set the chalk down, and turned to a fresh section of the board. He paused. The chat slowed. Then slowly, he began to draw again. But this time it wasn't numbers. It was letters. At the top of the board, in perfect clean strokes, he wrote. He was right. August Terrell, 1934. And beneath it, a single line of text. They tried to silence the proof, but it proved itself. The room behind the camera fell still. Green, watching from the side, swallowed hard. The comments froze. The broadcast cut to black. Silence. And then chaos. News anchors stammered through reports. Historic moment unfolding. Equation finally proven live. Child genius vindicates erased black scholar. Every outlet posted the final frame of the board. Terrell's name. Proof of a legacy that had been buried and reborn in real time. That evening, a panel show tried to pivot. Maybe we judged too quickly. Maybe we didn't ask enough questions before casting doubt. Another anchor, this time with more humility, said, "We're witnessing more than brilliance. We're witnessing correction. A cultural, academic, and historical correction." For Shanice, it was overwhelming. She sat beside Caden at home, laptop open, the broadcast now looping endlessly on every major site. Messages poured in, from universities, students, activists, parents, even celebrities. But the message that hit hardest was an email from a retired professor. "I taught at Cranebrook in 1967. I remember Terrell. He was lightning in a bottle. I didn't speak up then. I'm sorry. But today I cried watching your son finish what August started." Caden didn't respond. He just walked to his whiteboard and erased the equation slowly, all except the name at the top. "I want it to stay," he said softly. Shanice nodded. But not everyone was celebrating. At Cranebrook's main boardroom, the walls were silent, cold, empty. Dean Albright had resigned that morning, citing personal health matters. Dr. Hawthorne hadn't been seen publicly since the clip leaked of him referring to Caden as a dangerous narrative. The university scrambled to issue statements of solidarity, but they were too late. The world had already decided. And what it decided was this: Caden Price didn't just solve a problem. He exposed one. He didn't just prove the math. He proved the lie. The next morning, an open letter signed by 80,000 educators demanded a national review of how gifted black students are identified. The Department of Education announced a task force. A small progressive publisher approached Shanice with a proposal. A textbook built around Unfolded, co-authored by her son. But none of it felt celebratory to Caden, because his goal had never been revenge. It was visibility. It was legacy. And when the camera had gone dark, and the board had gone still, he'd felt something crack, not in pain but in relief. Like the weight he carried didn't belong to him alone anymore. It belonged to all the kids whose brilliance was ignored, to every teacher who saw them, to every parent who fought for them, and to one man who never got to see his name written in chalk the way it should have been. August Terrell. Still, something else was coming, because when Green returned home that evening, she found an envelope slid under her office door. No stamp, no name. Inside was a photo, faded, old, black and white. It was of August, standing next to someone they'd never seen before. A faculty member from the 1960s, hand resting on August's shoulder. The man bore a striking resemblance to one of the current university trustees. Green flipped it over. On the back, a handwritten note. "You erased him once. Now let's see what happens when the world remembers." But the final symbol he drew wasn't math. It was a message, one the world couldn't ignore. They once said he didn't belong. Now his name was on the curriculum. And the professor who doubted him quietly retired. The morning after the broadcast, universities across the country began issuing statements. Not of skepticism this time, but of acknowledgement. Department heads who had stayed silent were now offering full support. Graduate programs tentatively reached out with scholarships. Publishers scrambled to line up textbook contracts built around Unfolded. Districts requested training sessions on his visual framework. The wave was real. The shift was underway. At Cranebrook, the silence had been absolute. Alumni newsletters changed tone. The mathematics department's website rearranged itself overnight. The page formerly dedicated to the Jansen conjecture now included a footnote referencing Caden Price's corrected proof and visual model. Hawthorne's name was quietly dropped from the featured faculty list. His office was locked and emptied, rumored to be under investigation for academic misconduct tied to the Terrell files. Professor Talia Green watched it all from her cramped office. She smiled, but it was tired, measured. She understood that change on paper is one thing. Changing hearts and minds is another. She called Caden and Shanice into her office. The walls still smelled of chalk and old ink. A few students peeked at the doorway, curious. Green closed the door behind them. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice steady, "you've done more than prove the proof. You've provoked a reckoning." She slid an official-looking document across her desk. Its header read Graduate Fellowship in Visual Mathematics, the Terrell Price Initiative. The memo detailed funding from multiple universities, pledged support for Black and underrepresented students, and guidelines for implementing unfolded-based curriculum in partner schools. Caden picked it up, scanning it slowly. Shanice watched him, silent. Green's eyes ran over them both. "This is real," she said. "They're giving us the tools to build from here." Caden didn't speak. His fingers traced the seal at the bottom. Then Green's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, frowned. "I'm sorry, that's the board's executive committee. They're asking me to come immediately to review a new agenda." She looked back at Caden. "They said they'd like your presence." Shanice paled. The last time he'd entered one of their meetings, they tried to silence him. She fought the instinct to ask him not to go. But Caden just nodded. Later that day, he stood beside Green in the tall boardroom, a room he'd walked into in fear just days before, now vast and hollow, with its portraits of white men staring down. The board members sat scattered, faces taut. Caraway presided, presence frail. IT staff and legal counsel stood at the sides. "Thank you for joining," Caraway began. Caden held up the document Green had presented earlier. "You already know what this is." Dr. Vassell coughed. "We're here to discuss the terms of affiliation and usage rights for the unfolded framework within Cranebrook's curriculum." A board member frowned. "Yes, but there are concerns about licensing, accreditation and precedent." Green interjected. "Precedent is what got us here. It's time the precedent changed." A hush. Caden cleared his throat. "I'd like a seat at the table." Eyes shifted. Caraway's expression faltered. "Pardon me? You're drafting policy about how to use my work without consulting me. That's not guidance. That's control." Murmurs. One professor rose. "Mr. Price, you're not faculty. You don't have tenure. You cannot hold governance authority in institutional committees." Caden nodded. "I'm not asking for tenure. I'm asking for respect. I solved what no one else could. I believe that deserves voice." Silence pressed on them. Then Caraway's voice cracked. "You will be included in the committee, but only as an observer." That was a half step. Green stood. "Then we walk out." Caraway shifted, uncomfortable. The boardroom was divided now, alliances creaking. Eventually she relented. "Observer status is provisional. Let's proceed." They drafted the agreement clause by clause. Caden watched as lines of control, attribution, implementation bloomed in legal language. He countered subtly, demanding that attribution must appear in textbooks, that the Terrell name remain credited, that partner schools must maintain open access to unfolded tools, that grants from publishers be distributed equitably, that fund allocation be publicly audited. Board members who once dismissed him now scoffed silently at some clauses. Others scribbled notes, scribbled acceptance. After hours, Green whispered to Caden, "You've changed this room." He nodded, tired but firm. When the meeting adjourned, Caraway approached him. "I underestimated you," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I hope you'll forgive me." Caden nodded. "I hope you never do." In the hallway, students gathered. They cheered. Cameras flashed. The world was watching again. The next morning, the Terrell Price Initiative was officially launched. A baseline cohort of 50 schools announced. Grants, curriculum development, fellowships. News outlets called it a paradigm shift in mathematics education. University departments that had mocked him just days earlier sent formal letters. Some invited him for visiting scholar positions. Some offered him editorial roles. Some named lecture halls after him. Some apologized. Cranebrook's president posted a statement admitting past failures of inclusion and committing to reparative steps using the phrase inclusive mathematical justice. But no names of individuals were named. Shanice and Caden stood on stage at a press conference, Green by their side. Flashbulbs flashed. Questions flew. One reporter asked, "What do you say to those who still believe this could be a hoax that you were coached?" Caden looked into the crowd. "You don't believe a black boy can be a prodigy? That would be the real hoax." The room quieted. Weeks later, unannounced, a trustee's resignation notice circulated. The same trustee from the resurfaced photo with August, who had once stood behind the erasures, submitted his departure and publicly apologized for complicity in institutional suppression. A ripple. A small reckoning. But this victory was tempered. They were celebrated, but not accepted everywhere. Some departments refused to adopt his framework. Some funding bodies hesitated. Some university presses withheld contracts. Some critics still faintly questioned his youth or visibility. Green visited Caden at home late one night. "You did the near impossible," she said softly. "You forced change where everyone believed it unreachable." Caden looked at his whiteboard, still filled with equations. Then he erased everything slowly, except one phrase at the top: "For those who come after." Shanice stayed behind him. "Are you okay?"
He nodded.
"It's never about me now." She closed her eyes, but the final chapter wasn't done. Because late the next morning, a package arrived at their door. No label, no return. Inside was a folded photograph. It was August again, standing at the same board position as Caden. Year unknown, chalk in hand. But there was something new. In the corner of that photo, nearly hidden, was a silhouette of a second person. Someone standing 2 steps behind August, hand reaching tentatively toward the chalk. They recognized the profile. It was Hawthorne, young, before tenure, before this equation existed publicly. The implication was clear. The man who condemned the boy had once stood beside the erased man. Caden sat in stunned silence. Shanice's hand trembled on the photo. Green's eyes darkened. Because the last move he had to make, it wasn't for him. It was for the man who never got to make it. But Caden had one last thing to do, and it wasn't for him. Years later, he returned to the elementary school that labeled his genius a behavioral issue, and with one piece of chalk, he left a message for every kid like him. Cranebrook's gains meant nothing if he forgot the place that first tried to bury him. So one bright morning, Caden Price and Shanice drove back to Jefferson Elementary. The building looked smaller than in memory, brick worn, playground faded, but unmistakably the same. A banner still read, "Welcome to Jefferson, home of the Jaguars." They walked through the front doors. A buzzer, a receptionist's startled look, a morphing recognition. "Mr. Price?" asked the office clerk, voice trembling. "Is that young Mr. Price?" "Yes," he nodded. The clerk led them through the hushed halls. Young students filtered out for recess, some glancing curiously. Teachers and staff recognized them now. Whispers bounced down corridors. They paused before classroom 5B, his old home base, posters of multiplication tables, crayon drawings, a faded certificate for most improved reader. It all looked innocent, meddling, pastoral. At the far wall, nearly at the back, someone had drawn a bare rectangle in chalk, just a framed outline, as though something was meant to be written there. The custodian had apparently left it blank for a community announcement board. Caden approached it, step by step. He held a single stick of white chalk. A crowd gathered, students peeking over shoulders, teachers holding back behind doors. No one interrupted. He whispered, "May I?" No one said no. His hand touched the frame's corner. He drew inside it, a clean border. Then he wrote slowly, deliberately, in large letters. "They said I was disruptive for solving. They said I didn't belong for speaking. They tried to erase what my skin exposed. But I belong in every equation." Below that, in smaller but firm script, to every child told to sit down. "You are needed in this room too." He stood back. Silence. Students gathered, some with eyes wide, some with phones taken out quietly. Teachers cleared throats. An administrator approached, mouth open, then closed again. A girl in the front row, a student with braids, looked at the chalk message, then at Caden. Her eyes locked on his. "He looks like me," she whispered. Others murmured. One teacher whispered, "Is that Price?" From the hallway, a janitor peeked, recognized the writing style, his jaw going slack. A principal walked by, stopped. They had no defense now. The chalk stood beyond arguing. It was a mural of truth where ignorance once reigned. Caden turned to Shanice, quiet. She nodded, tears in her eyes. He turned back to the wall and added one more line, smaller, at the bottom. August Terrell, 1934-1973. The proof held itself. A hush. The building's old wood floors creaked under the gravity of the moment. Then a teacher tapped a student's shoulder. "Take a picture. Show your parents. Let them see what they once ignored." Another student stepped forward and touched the chalk letters with her fingertips. "He wrote for us," she said. Cameras snapped. Phones lit. The wall began to hum with energy. And as the camera zoomed out, past students reaching forward, past faces that looked stunned, past desks in chalk dust, and memory, the shot framed the message in full, bold, unerasable. And one girl whispered again, He looks like me. The camera zoomed out as students gathered around the wall, reading in silence, and one girl whispered, "He looks like me." No child should be punished for dreaming beyond the limits others set for them. If this story made you stop and think, don't let it end here. Type yes if you believe every kid deserves